Hi guys, and welcome to this episode of Drafting Diaries. So I'm Catherine from Project Patterns, or Kate as I'm also called. I have very many names. And yeah, I run online classes for pattern cutting, and I have a website where I sell tools and all those kinds of things. And I'm also a professional pattern cutter and have been for a very long time. And I'm joined by Charlotta.
Yes, hi, I'm Charlotta. I'm Charlotta from the School of Pattern Cutting. Like Kate, I'm a pattern cutter as well, but my background is both design and teaching as well. So we complement each other quite well because Kate is professionally much more advanced than me, but then I bring in the design element. And today, as Kate said, we're going to look at toiles. But before we do it, Kate, I saw on Instagram you got a new course and it sounds really excited. I'd really love to know a bit more about it.
I have. I'm so excited about it. So I've been working. I actually am a bit scared to add up how many months I've spent working on this course. But let's just say a really long time behind the scenes. And if anyone follows me on Instagram, you would have seen that sometimes I go really quiet on Instagram. It's because I'm working super hard on this course, basically. And it's really a course aimed to give you a good foundation in pattern cutting. So it's aimed at beginners. It's called Pattern Cutting for Beginners. It starts right at the basics. We talk about what pattern cutting is, why we need it, and how we do it. And we look at the tools and all those kinds of things. So it gives you a really good grounding. And then we start to think about the techniques of pattern cutting. So really getting into the nitty gritty of how we do it. So that's things like dart rotation, that's converting our darts to gathers and pleats, that's converting our darts to seams as well, to create princess seams and all that sort of stuff. And then we take it another step further. We learn another technique called slash and spread, where we add extra volume into our pieces to create frills, to create gather details. We learn how to do knife pleats, box pleats, inverted box pleats, and how we change the silhouette of our garments. Then we go on to drafting our different sleeves. So we learn how to do a bishop sleeve, a lantern sleeve, a tulip sleeve, a raglan sleeve, a kimono sleeve, all kinds of sleeves. And we also have a look at how we can change our necklines and our armholes, and specifically how we have to think about adding extra shaping into our necklines and our armholes to kind of contour our basic block to our body. And we also look at how we can create our finishing details for our garments. So that's things like waistbands, facings, pockets, those kinds of things. And then we finish up by just sort of recapping and thinking about where we can go next and what we can do with the skills that we've learned. And it's probably worth saying that this class is really focusing on, once you've got your basic blocks, what do you do with them? How do you take that basic block and turn it into something completely new and just create the dress or the top or the skirt that you've been dreaming of but have just not been able to find anywhere?
Yeah, it sounds super exciting. And it is sort of a whole, because we always talk about making your own block, but when we talk about design elements, but never sort of all the basics you already need, isn't it, to create all that. And I think our theme for today, toiles, is perfect because it is sort of, once you learn all your drafting, you need to make your toiles.
Exactly, yeah. So we've got 5 things about toiles or mock-ups or muslins, whatever you call them, wherever you're from. They're all the same thing, aren't they? They're just a mock-up that you make to test your pattern, to see if, first of all, is your pattern cutting correct? Second of all, does it fit? Third of all, do you like the design? So these are 5 things that we think you guys need to know about toiles. Number 1 is that you need to pick the right fabric and the right weight fabric for your toile. If your final garment is going to be a chiffon, you don't want a toile in a heavy cotton. You want a toile in something like a chiffon or a very lightweight muslin.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's one of those things. I think you might even do like just check the fit in a calico just to know whether your pattern cutting is roughly correct. But to see how the garment hang, it doesn't work in calico. So you don't need to buy chiffon or something, but I always think lining fabrics are actually for stuff like that. Anything silk and stuff, that's fantastic. But yeah, always just think, if you're looking at an image, what does the dress actually look like, the fabric? And that's what you have to find, the nearest to your final fabric, but not as expensive.
And if we're thinking about calicos, it's quite important to think or maybe realize that there's not just one weight of calico as well. There's different weights of calico. So when I'm doing my first initial very rough toile or mock-up, I pick either a lightweight calico, which is kind of like a muslin sort of weight, very lightweight, really quite floaty for a cotton. Or there's a medium weight, which is our standard weight, so something like this that you can see on the toile. And there's a heavier weight, which is more of a canvas, which is what I would pick if I was doing a coat or something like that, which is going to be like a really heavy wool. I would probably just toile in a heavy weight or a canvas calico.
Yeah. I think a problem is anything heavyweight calico is always, it's going to be so stiff, isn't it? So, and I think that's why we think fabric, actually, even before you make a toile, fabric is actually where you start with, because otherwise it's sort of pointless to spend time making a toile if you're actually not going to know how it's going to look in the final fabric.
Yeah, and my design tutors always used to say to me, you don't start designing with a sketch, you start designing with the fabric. It should be the fabric that inspires you, not the other way around.
Yes, because I like it.
Number 2 is to be efficient with your toiling. So don't make a huge toile that uses up, 20 meters of fabric if you actually only need to check the shoulder. So there's a couple of ways we can make ourselves efficient. First of all, we can do half toiles. If you're really unsure about it and you just want to check your proportions and stuff, you don't have to toile the whole garment. If it's symmetrical, you can just do from the center front to the center back, do one side. You also have to think about what your starting point is and what your end point is. So if we have a top that we're making that's very similar to our basic bodice block, and we're just changing some of the details, maybe on the front bodice somewhere, we're not changing like the sleeve. You don't have to mock up the sleeve. You already know it should fit you, right?
Yes, totally. I think that's what you see most often, that people even maybe put in facings and stuff like that. I think your first toile, and actually I think if you're making something like you said, which is a similar fit to your basic bodice, you know how your sleeves fit. I only make a half front. I'm a bit lazy. If it's for myself, I think as well. But it is like often, if you know your sleeve fits you, you've done it a few times, isn't it? So as you get to know your block better, you actually know what you have to check the fit for. So for example, you don't have to check that it's big enough for your bust because it always fits you. And I think that's also, if you come from commercial patterns and you're moving towards making your own and you're a bit unsure, because with commercial patterns, you always have to trial the whole thing because you don't really know, because each pattern is slightly different fitted. Once you know your own block well, you literally just have to fit what you change to a certain degree, unless it's like a new fabric or really different style.
And I think that's one of my favorite things about drafting my own patterns, is that I know they start from my basic block, which fits me. So actually, even though I'm having to add in that whole extra process of drafting my pattern, really, I probably spend less time from start to finish, from my design to my finished garment, than I would do if I bought a pre-made pattern and kind of adjusted the fit of that and had to do various different mock-ups along the way. Because when I toile from my block, like Charlotta said, I know it fits me. So let's say I'm doing a summer dress with a sleeve really similar to my block. Maybe I'm putting some gathered frills on the bottom. Maybe I'm adding a couple of darts somewhere, just rotating them. Those are small tweaks, really. So I can probably just do one quick toile to know that I've done everything correct and the proportions look great before I go into my real fabric. Whereas if I did a pre-bought pattern, I'd have to do a whole host of adjustments to make sure it fits me properly. I'd have to do a full toile. I'd probably then still want to do some more tweaks to it, and then I'd probably do another toile before I make the final thing. So it's probably a more accurate process when you start with your own blocks.
Yes, and it's more about the enjoyable stuff, the design stuff, because you know the fit as well. I think the only one, because I've recently done a Claire McCardle dress. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen it, the stripy dress. And I did a tutorial on Patreon about it, and everybody loved it. So I'm actually making it. And that's got a wrap front, and it's got gusset sleeves. So there I actually made a whole toile, just because there it all goes with you changing the sleeve shape. But if you have your normal satin sleeve and stuff, I quite often you just check what you actually change rather than the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And also, you know, if you're doing a skirt that's really loose and floaty and it's not fitted, and you know,
Yeah.
you've done a similar skirt before, if it's just like tiered, like gathered tiers, I probably wouldn't bother toiling that. I'd probably just toile from the waist up and then just cut my
Yes.
skirt straight and real.
Yeah, so maybe you should call it naughty things you do when you're not working professionally. But it is true. Yeah, I never twirl skirts. So now it's out there. I only ever draw up twirl about the waist, because with a skirt, if it's a full skirt, you just pin it on. Do you mean it's mostly squares, it's geometric. So yes, I'm a bit lazy with that. But I think it's sort of finding, if it's for yourself, you can just pin on yourself and try it out.
Yeah.
So what
So the last thing I was going to say on that is, you know, don't feel like you have to do a whole toile. You don't have to do the lining and everything as well. You know, you can just do a shell. It's okay to just toile the outer. The lining should fit if your outer fits.
Yes.
So number 3 is check the right things. So know what you're checking when you're making a toile. You're not making a toile just to try it on and then shove it on the floor and be like, yeah, it's all fine. There are various things you actually have to check on your toile so that your final or your next sample is perfect. So Charlotta, do you want to run through some of the things that we would check?
Yes, we tried to find a catchy name, but we couldn't. But here it is. It's about proportions. So how it fits you, everything is related. It's about balance. And I think that's a really important one whenever you're changing fit, but it's still balanced across your whole body and around your whole body. The other thing is fit. So I actually, when I make something for myself, I try on the trial several times and I walk around. So you actually think about, does it look good and does it fit good? I think that's basically the 2 things you have to check. So it's not just thinking, oh yeah, it looks really pretty. It's actually saying, how does it look on me and how does it fit on me?
And is it functional? I think that idea of wearing it and walking around a little bit in it is a really good idea, because, you know, particularly something like a wrap, you might be standing straight, not moving, and think, oh yeah, that's great. And then as soon as you start to move around, it might, you know, boom, expose you. But you're not going to know that unless you wear it. And if you only wear the final garment, then it's a bit late, isn't it, to make any changes? So yeah, you need to check that. And for me, a few other things that I check are sort of proportions, but in terms of positions of things. So is my waist in the correct position? Is my measurement still correct? Is anything gaping? Do I like the proportions of where my seams are placed? Maybe I've got some style lines on there. Do I like that? Do I not? All these kinds of things. So assessing the design and also assessing the fit.
Yes. And I think it's also thinking about like what the great thing about making your own clothes is that you can make them fit for purpose, as you said. So if your job is mostly sitting at a table or leaning forward, you can actually sort of tailor your clothes a bit to incorporate it. Because you can actually like think about, as you said, very few of us always stand straight. You have certain positions. So actually check these positions and make sure that it still looks good. So they're actually clothes you can use every day.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you can
So number 4 is don't be precious with your toiles. So when I say don't be precious, I mean, just don't be afraid to cut them up, draw on them, do whatever you need to do on them to get you to a point that your next toile is going to be perfect.
Yeah, because we had a chat a bit about wearable toiles for Muslims, and you see it quite a lot online. And I think it's something which really works okay when you have a commercial pattern where you're just checking if the fit is, and then you can do a few adaptations. But if you're making your own patterns, the first toile is really just about checking the fit. So you don't want, first of all, even if it's a variable toile, it's still quite nice fabric. So I think that's when you start getting, you don't want to cut it up or draw on it. It should just be purely, it should be like a piece of paper you put on and then you get rid of it, you rip it open and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, and I've got an example of a toile that I made as a very quick mock-up for something I did, and you can see how much I've drawn all over this toile. You know, my initial seam, I moved down here and then I crossed it out. I marked my button positions on here. I've got my pocket marked on. I've got seams on my sleeve. I've really cut into this and I've really gone to town on it. It's definitely not usable again.
Yeah.
But it's fine because it was my first toile. So even from the starting point, it's in calico. It was never going to be usable. And I think that idea of using your toile as a blank piece of paper, like you said, Charlotta, is such a good idea because it really is a blank piece of paper. You should not be afraid to cut into that, because maybe you do need to cut into it. Maybe you need to cut into your collar to be able to spread it, to get it to sit nicely. But if you're trying to make a wearable toile, you're not going to want to do that. So
No.
the only thing you're going to end up with is a final garment that isn't as good as it could have been.
Yes, I think what we both said, that like you could, if you've got really precious fabric, you could make a sort of more everyday version first of a not precious fabric, but always toile beforehand. That's sort of the intermediate stage.
Yeah.
It's sort of where it's nearly finished, but yeah, you don't want to change anything when you're on the wearable part already.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that when you're making your own patterns, you're going to have to do more than one toile. So the initial first toile is normally in a calico, which you draw all over, you cut out, and you do your thing too. And then you probably do have to do another one or two after that. And if you do want to do a wearable toile, then your wearable toile should be the last toile that you do. So maybe it's toile number 3. Everything is almost perfect. You're just double checking everything, and therefore it can probably be okay with just a few tweaks to it, and then it can be a wearable toile before you cut into your really expensive nice fabric for your final garment.
And I think it's because earlier we said we don't always toile everything, do we? And I think that's always sort of knowing it's something. If you're making a coat, an overcoat, for example, then you definitely want to make first toile for fit, second toile, and then maybe a final toile out of the nearly real fabric. But if you're just making a quick summer dress, then you might not have to do it. So I think that's also because I think toile is, because I've got one here, I don't know if you can see it, and that's like, it's for my archive, and I think I just did an example, but it's actually completely useless because it's a wool jacket made of calico, but it looks quite nice and you can try it on. But it's sort of thing, if you're trying something new, you might want to make it, but most of the time with your wardrobe, you don't need to. It's sort of actually thinking, what do I need it for? Because it's not always straightforward. In industry, we got really strict rules, but if it's for yourself to actually think, is it something I'm confident of, or is it something I'm not quite sure of? So I really need to make sure I get it right. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. If it's something really special, then I would probably do an extra toile. If it's for myself, I would do an extra toile just to be extra sure it's perfect. It depends on your final fabric as well. If your final fabric's really expensive, then definitely do more toiles than you would have thought necessary, just to be 100% sure. But yeah, if it's like an easy summer dress, if it's something that you are confident in your drafting skills, if it's something that you've drafted before, maybe something quite similar, then you can probably minimize the amount of toiles that you're going to do. But yeah, it does sort of depend also on your level of drafting and your experience.
And I think it's also because people then now might suddenly think, oh my god, 3 toiles, I'm gonna just do commercial sewing patterns because I don't have to do all that. But what I think, as we're all trying to be more sustainable and we all have lots of clothes, I think with drafting your own and making your own wardrobe, it's really about getting like your perfect clothes which fit you. So once you've trialed everything fits perfectly, you have that one dress which you can then make again, and you can make beautifully, and it will fit you, and it won't be just sort of something which is nearly right, but you're not going to wear because you can't sit down or something, so it is actually worth it. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but it is worth it.
And you can, just because you've toiled one style 3 times doesn't mean that the next style you draft based on that you have to draft 3 times. Say you've drafted something 3 times and it's perfect, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to make the same thing, but I'm just going to change the sleeve, or I'm going to just change something small. You don't really need to retoile, just go straight for it, if it's a small change, of course. Or maybe you just have retoile that section, not the whole thing. Okay, so our last point about toiles is actually a little tip for you guys, and this is something that we do in the industry quite a lot, that we've noticed we don't really see a lot of people at home doing. Now, when we say toiles, obviously we normally think you make a pattern, then you make a toile, but sometimes we start with a toile, and the toile is usually our block toile. So we can take our toile of our block, which, you know, is just our basic block made up, and we can draw on it with a pen that, you know, you can rub out with steam or water or something, or we can tape lines on it. And what this does is it enables us to get our pattern to a point that it's more accurate or as close to possible as our final design. And that's going to make your toiling process quicker. It's going to minimize the amount of toiles that you make, and it's going to make your first toile so much better than it would have been otherwise. So as an example, I've got my basic bodice block here, and I've got my design tape. You can buy this at Showman. I'll put a link in the show notes, in the description. So used to being on a podcast. And I've just taped on like a little sweetheart necklace on neckline onto there. And what I'll do now is, if I'm making this into a pattern, is I'll trace this line onto my pattern by placing my calico on top of my pattern. Then that means that my first toile is going to have the exact neckline that I want, because I've already marked it onto my mannequin in full scale in real life.
And there's one more thing which is really great about that, is that it's 3D. Because I think whenever you're drafting flat, you lose the proportions on how things look from different angles. And I've got the same. I've got a really basic block, but it's just like when you can just draw lines, you can even drape fabric on, but you already know how it looks on you, because on flat pattern cutting a lot of stuff looks cool, but then it actually doesn't work in 3D. So I think that's a sort of thing people never talk about, but you before you even draft, you already shouldn't have an idea of how it works to help you.
It's that idea again of taking your 2D pattern and your 3D garment and finding the relationship between them. If you can start in 3D before you start doing the 2D, then you're going to get one step ahead of yourself, and you're going to have to do one less toile. You know, if you just get your pattern and just draw on some stuff onto that neckline on your basic bodice, it might not be actually where you want it to be on your body. So if you can start on your body, then yeah, you're getting one step ahead of yourself, which is great.
And it's actually, if you have a few different trials or fits, it's a really good idea to have a little library of trials. So I've got a whole dress, for example, and you can have a coat on and trousers, and then you just put it on, and you basically just draw on you sketch on yourself, and when you do a drafting, and everything just makes more sense and is smoother.
Yeah, and you can even take details from other toiles. So like Charlotta was saying that she has some collars that she has toiles of, you know, you can take that detail and you can put it on top of your basic bodice block to kind of see what it would look like already and see where you want it to be. There we go, she's prepared. I love this.
On, but yes. And I think it's because that's what you sort of learn, because I used to teach quite a lot, and that's what you sort of learn, that this, if you the same as you, if you work with lots of beginners, it's sort of giving them the confidence and saying, once you've done something, don't just throw it away. It's sort of, it can be used for something else, isn't it?
Reuse it, repurpose it, redesign it. It doesn't matter if you use an old design as your starting point. If you're being clever. Basically what you're doing is you're being a clever pattern cutter and a clever designer, and you're making your life as easy as possible.
And that's what you're all about, isn't it? Helping you draft your wardrobe. It was really interesting, Catherine. As always, I always learn something new of you. So it was, thank you very much for it. So
I always learn from you.
Yes, that's good. Where can people find your new course then?
Okay, so if you want to find my new course, you can find it on my website, which is www.projectpatterns.co.uk. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm at Project Patterns. And yeah, I also have a podcast, which is called Fashion Half Cut. That's available on iTunes and Spotify. And we also have an Instagram page called at Fashion Half Cut. And where can people find you, Charlotta?
I was going to say Fashion Half Cut is, of course, how we met as well.
Yes, there's an episode with Charlotta if you want to hear us talking about her journey and hear more about her life.
And I think it's your topic at the moment, things which aren't easy to explain on fashion.
Yeah, we just did an episode basically about questions that we don't have a yes or no answer for. And we've called it the grey area of pattern cutting, because sometimes it's just instinct and it's a bit more complicated than, yeah, we'll just nip off 2 centimeters there.
Yeah. And I think especially with social media, everything sounds, people make it look like you just drape it and you got a couture dress, but quite often it's not that
Yeah.
clean, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, and if you want to find out more about my pattern cutting, I'm Charlotta at School of Pattern Cutting on Instagram. And I've also got a website called learnschoolofpattern.com. But mostly I'm actually on Patreon, and we were talking about it because that's what I really love, is working with people, and I now mostly draft vintage tutorials, which sort of people ask me to draft for them. So that's really enjoyable. So it's again the sort of thing, you got your bodice block, now you're having fun designing.
Do you know what I'm really enjoying seeing? You doing like design analysis. So you did a video where you looked at a skirt and then you kind of explained how you would make that pattern and you analyzed it from a pattern cutting point of view. I just thought that's so cool. I really think a lot of our watchers, I guess, because this is a YouTube video, would love that. So if you guys haven't seen that, go and have a look. It's really amazing and really interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's normally I try to do it live on Instagram because then people can actually ask me, and it is actually really frightening because I do it blind. But I think that's the whole thing. That's how you learn, because I quite often don't know and I don't have the answer. And I think that's what, the more you learn about pattern cutting, is that there isn't always an answer, isn't it? Even that's why we trial as well. That's why we make samples, because we don't always know the answers. We're trying things out.
Yes, I used to have a senior pattern cutter when I was a junior pattern cutter who once said to me that actually none of us really know what we're doing is the correct thing. We're just guessing, like, okay, yes, some guesses are very educated and we're 99.9% sure that we're doing the right thing, but we don't actually know, like, and that's why we trial, because we have to test that what we've done is correct. And no matter your experience level, you're going to have to do that.
Yeah, so true. And I think actually the people I've known who have the most experience, they're really humble. And I think you have to start to worry if somebody thinks they know too much, because I always think I'm learning every day.
Yeah, exactly. Cool, guys. So those are our 5 things about toiles that we think you need to know. If you've got anything to add to that, let us know in the comments. Maybe you've got number 6 and 7. We'd love to hear what you want to add and also what you thought. If you've loved it, let us know. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And like we said, you can find us on Instagram and on our websites. So thank you so much for watching. That's bye from me.
And bye from me.